Welcome to episode 8 of the Give Us Time podcast, the podcast that highlights the extraordinary members of our armed forces and their families. So welcome to the first episode of 2021, and to celebrate this, we've got ourselves an amazing guest. He joined the military at age 16 and spent 25 years in the army. He went on to become one of the first members of Help for Heroes, and we are pleased to welcome Mark Elliot. So Mark, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Absolute pleasure, Alex. No problem at all. And on that note, I think I'll leave. You summed it up pretty well. That's the end of my life.
Only getting started right now. Only getting started. And of course, everyone, joining alongside me is Scotty Derrick and Rupert Forrest. So thank you, chaps, for also joining us.
A pleasure.
Yeah, great to be back.
All right, Mark. So do you want to go and tell us what it was like as a 16-year-old joining the army?
Mad. I think, bizarrely, I was never one of these people who sort of always dreamed of being a soldier and joining the army, and frankly couldn't think of anything worse. In those days, you may not believe this, but I had fairly long hair, as was everybody in the 70s. I wasn't particularly good at school. I didn't really understand why I needed to know Pythagoras' theorem, etc., etc. I thoroughly enjoyed sport, being outdoors. And so when I left school at 16, having had a decision with my teachers that why would I waste their time with A-levels? It was going to waste both our time, and I thought I could save them a bit of money. But in all fairness, in those days, only the sort of top 10% did A-levels, and the top 2% of them went on to university. And the rest of us were told to go and get a job. So, as a 16-year-old wandering the streets of Tunbridge Wells in Kent, I accidentally walked past the army recruiting office and rather stupidly walked in, to which this ginormous beast clearly had been told that his recruiting figures for the Guards was down, and that I fitted the bill perfectly, i.e. I was over 6 foot tall and not that bright. So I left there, I walked home, and told my mum that I'd joined the army, to which she said, "That's wonderful, dear, you'll get yourself a trade, and hopefully you've joined a corps or something like that." To which I said, I appear to have joined the Grenadier Guards, and as there's no swearing on this podcast, I'll leave out the reaction, but she wasn't best pleased that Mark had an education and then was going to stand still for many years. And so off I went. Because I was 16, I was very fortunate, and I actually mean this. There was some good bits to it. I landed up at Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion in Shorncliffe, an absolutely incredible place. But on day one, I walked in to Waterloo Company into a room, and bumped into a bunch who had joined the Irish Guards, Scots Guards, Welsh Guards, Grenadiers and Coldstream. All of us 16. Most of us should have been in prison or Borstal, but they grouped us together in a room of 30, and that's where I was reborn. by
Amen to that.
Yeah. But it was an incredible year. The Infantry Junior Leaders, they taught military training, obviously, but also education, but education that I thought was probably valuable as opposed to Pythagoras' theorem.
Understandable.
And so managed to succeed after that. Even got myself promoted to junior sergeant. I've never forgotten, we were up in Otterburn, that godforsaken place. I went back there. It's quite funny. I went back there several times during my career, and then when I got senior enough, I remember the commanding officer saying, "Mr. Elliot, we're going to Otterburn next year. I ain't going." I beg your pardon, Mr. If I go there again, I'm PVRing. I'm just not. I'm not going there again. Anyway,
Otterburn's the only place. Otterburn's the only place I've ever seen cows wear Gore-Tex jackets.
oh, mate. I mean,
It's
I think
horrendous.
it's probably the last time I cried. Otterburn was just a nightmare. But I was up there at 16, and they were beasting us 16-year-olds, and the boys were fairly exhausted, having done section attacks all day, and they were lying around. And the sergeant said, "Right, Elliot, you take over the platoon. Off you go." And stupidly, I jumped up, desperately trying to be sarcastic, and said, "Right, come on, you lot, get on your feet. We're just going to smash this, and no problem at all. Off we go." Bugger me, they did it. And no one was more surprised than I was. And then I got hauled in and said I had leadership qualities. And you go, dear God, is that all it took? But I went from there. Then you had to go to the Guards depot, which really in the 70s was not a great place to be. And so more tabbing up and down sand hills in 2 dress and ammo boots and a gas mask. Thankfully, those days have long gone in the military. And then all my friends were posted to their battalions in Hong Kong and Cyprus and some wonderful places. And I got posted to the 1st Battalion, Grenadier Guards, which was literally out of the Guards depot, turn right, and 300 meters up the road. So that was wonderful. At the time, my battalion were in South Armagh, having a pretty rough time. And then I spent really about 25 years spending my time in South Armagh, funnily enough, or not funnily enough. But having done that, I joined the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards and left the British Army 25 years later.
Oh, wow. You know, well, I'm not going to let you sum it up that quickly. You can't get away from us that quickly there. I'm assuming, Scotty, you felt very similar there when you heard that he just got posted just down the road as someone who also was expecting to be taken to Hong Kong or Hawaii or somewhere.
That is right, and I'll just highlight this fact to Mark as well. I remember I was in Purbright in basic training, and I remember just about to leave, and they said, right, fill out the posting preference. This is where you get a chance to apply for a posting. I thought, this is great. Someone's now going to listen to us. So I put 3 choices: Cyprus, Germany, or Canada, and I was delighted with Catterick.
I mean, if only then, we knew what we knew now, that actually you should have put Catterick, and you'd have landed up nicely in Hong Kong.
I think that's what Rupert did.
Yeah.
Because he's been to every continent, Hawaii. He'll probably tell you himself.
I landed up, I did, so I was lucky enough to go to Berlin, fairly sharp. So Berlin, for those, obviously no one on the current call, but those listening in, Berlin was surrounded by the Russians, East Germans. So you have West Berlin that was inside East Berlin, that was inside East Germany, and completely separated from the West. So we did a lot of training and things, but there was no point really in training because you were already surrounded. The last people that the Russians were going to take out was West Berlin. So actually, I've just got to be careful on swearing. So I spent a good 2.5 years drunk. So I was a guardsman in Berlin, surrounded. Booze was cheap. I had a well of a time. Guarded Rudolf Hess. Went out on the Grunewald training. You did the train guard and things like that. Very strange stuff.
It's very similar to what Rupert and David was explaining. Was that about the same time you were there? No, not the drunken part, but was it about when Rupert was there and from 45 onwards? David must have been from the mid-60s. But you were probably going to be there at the same time, weren't you, Rupert?
Yeah, I mean, I was there. Oh, God. So I got married there. So that was not until it was our sort of first married posting.
Wow.
And it was amazing because we still had the Putzfrau system. Were you married then, Mark?
No, good God, no. If I'd have been married then, I'd have been divorced fairly quickly. But yeah, one thing, knowing now that Rupert was actually in Berlin as a pad, God, did we hate the pads. So not only did they get a hell of a lot of LOA, they also got a thing called frizz.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine this city is surrounded, they had to have stocks of food. I mean, vast underground stocks of food. But even in those days, they had things called run-out dates on food. So what they used to do was give it out to the pads. So the pads would suddenly write this list, I want to eat rump steak for 7 days. All right, there's your rump steak. And us singlies in the block were still eating Army catering corps with delivery. The pads got loads of... I'm sorry, we've gone off on one, only because my hatred of pads in Berlin.
Well, as one of the hated many, I mean, it wasn't quite that easy because, you'd order your rump steak and you'd have to pay a Deutschmark or something, which was about 30p.
Yeah, thanks,
but quite often you get a leg of lamb back or something.
Nightmare.
And they wouldn't have any rump steak. I mean, it was.
I think
tough. It was really tough.
I can feel your pain from here, Rupert.
And was that about the same time, though, guys? Was it?
I went there 79, came back in 81. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I was a bit after you.
Yeah. But it was
lived in that wonderful barracks in Purbright, 300 metres down the road from your depot as well, which for a jock regiment was quite frightening because you could hear these guards, sergeant majors, bellowing at people all day because I think you ran the drill courses there for the army as well.
Well, the all arms drill wing was just down the road. Yeah.
So you could spend your day wandering around barracks and doing stuff, and in the distance you could hear this squad, everyone getting ready to protect Her Majesty on the drill square.
All good fun.
The best courses I've ever done was the junior and senior all arms drill courses in Purbright. My goodness, did my liver get a right kicking?
Well, it was quite funny because later on in life, several friends of mine became the RSM of the all arms drill wing. So I always made sure that I got an invite down to your passing out parades and just stood on the square watching you lot suffer and then going to the bar, and then you all had to buy the drinks. It was a great day.
So Mark, moving on from the horrors of Berlin, I must say that it sounds like it was a hard old time. Where did you go to next then?
Well, then we got sent back, and this sort of sums up my military career of dumps. I got sent back to cavalry barracks in Hounslow, which really hadn't seen any renovation since probably about 1856. I mean, even in our rooms, our bunks, you had posts down the middle of the room where you tied up your horse. I mean, it was just bizarre. But there it was back to public duties, and then off to South Armagh for my first tour. So that was deepest of joys, Crossmaglen for 8 months, and literally that's the only place in 25 years, every single one of my tours, including a 3-year tour, which we'll discuss later, was South Armagh. So I got to know South Armagh pretty well. Don't get me wrong, I went back, we'll talk about it later, I went back and I spent 3 years in Portadown. But in those days, Crossmaglen really was not a nice place to be.
Band-Aid country.
Yeah.
Lots of air miles.
Well, yeah, only if they ever fly the bloody helicopters. If not, you were tabbing. But you kind of got to remember, and people forget, it always annoys me when people call it, Northern Ireland, the Troubles. They weren't troubles. It was a war. They didn't want to call it a war because it was part of the United Kingdom. But it was a war, and it'd always be a war, and people got injured and killed, and we lost one of our, well, not one of our guys. He was Private or Corporal Taverner, who was coming down and standing in for us, as one of the bricks was on leave, and he came from the Devon and Dorsets, and he entered the square, and literally, I say funnily enough, I don't mean it as in ha ha, but it was on CCTV. You could see him looking at the car. He realised it was down, and one of the buggers just pressed it and blew him up. And I remember going out on the ground, and one of the other platoons was coming in. And it was the first time, I think, you realise that irrespective of all the training you'd done, however professional you are, whatever regiment or corps you're in, if the buggers want to get you, that's exactly what they're going to do. And that's a really hard lesson for an 18-year-old, that actually you can do everything right. But if they're going to get you, they're going to get you. And that was a tough time. And the smell, you kind of never forget. It's funny how that sort of never leaves you. Sometimes the sights get lost in time, but the smell, I've never forgotten. And sadly, he managed to get to Belfast, but died a couple of days later. And I suppose, reflecting back now of friends that I've lost, sorry, I hate that expression. I haven't lost them. I know exactly where they are. Friends that have been killed. Looking back now on the boys and girls of my time with Help for Heroes, many of them would have survived, because, you know, medical science, defence medical, helicopters, you know, even the training of the boys and girls is vast, and so many of them, I guess, would have survived. But I guess that's true of any time, any conflict, as time passes. So yeah, Crossmaglen was an interesting place. You lived in what they call submarines. They were literally stacked on top of each other. I think the whole platoon were in one sub, and you just hotbedded for 8 months. You know, I suppose looking back, there was no such thing as Gore-Tex. There was none of this fun webbing and keeping dry. You just went out into South Armagh, and if the Wessex didn't come and get you, or you know, occasionally the Navy had lynxes out there because they were the only ones with radar that could get into Besbrook Mill, and then you tabbed it back in. So you got to know the feeder roads and the area around Crossmaglen pretty damn well. And then went back there a few times. But yeah, that was the first sort of, you know, moment you thought, blimey, yeah, this isn't all good.
And you're only 18 at the time as well when all this is going on. That must be very hard to take in as such a young man.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was the same for all of us. And most of us in those days, people tended to stay in the army or until they did an operational tour. It was something, and you would come back from tour, and most of the battalion would then say, right, I've done my 3 years, or I'm PVRing, I'm out of here, I've got the medal, I ain't doing that again. It was only the Muppets that, you know, that stayed in and stayed in the same battalion for about 18 years. Yeah, so the battalion turned over pretty quickly after operational tours. I think it was the same for all battalions. You know, there were a group of guys, and entirely understandable, who went sod that, and got out. So they'd kind of done the public duties, done a bit of Germany, done the operational tour. It was, I'm out of here.
What made you want to stay then?
Well, because it wasn't that difficult. It wasn't that hard. And probably it wasn't that hard, and probably couldn't be asked to get out. I think I got married in 80. I've got to be careful because my wife might listen to this. So I got married when we were in Hounslow in 83. Still married. I think my marriage has survived because of the fact that I wasn't there most of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I found something that I could do, and they seemed to think I was pretty good at it. It didn't really test me to utter limit. I didn't have a problem with it. I've moved into the admin side of life because I was one of the few guardsmen that could read and write.
Nice.
So there was enough to tax your brain and remain operational, and it was the operations side that I actually enjoyed as opposed to paper shuffling. And I found that you could do operational paperwork, and that was so what you did mattered as opposed to being stuck in the Ministry of Defence turning out DCIs. So that's kind of where I stayed. I was fortunate enough to get posted first time as a Lance Corporal to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, or in those days it was known as Super Holiday at Public Expense.
I've got to ask why it was called that.
Well, because again, in the early 80s, Alex, the whole ethos of everything, with the exception of Northern Ireland, and of course we'd done the Falklands, but with the exception of military operations, was based on the fact that you didn't do anything.
Oh.
So you had the Russians on one side and us and the Americans on the other side, and don't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's the way you kept the peace. There was very little going on at the time. The Falklands had been done, and so it was really back to South Armagh, and so we did that again. Then we went off to Germany to Oxford Barracks. This was 87, where we were the first battalion to get this new fighting vehicle called Warrior, which was an absolute crock. The chain gun kept having breech explosions, and I remember a company commander, great lad. He was the gunnery officer. So you had all these new terms going on in an infantry battalion of gunnery officers and things like that. And this gun kept exploding on Hona Ranges, funnily enough, Rupert. God bloody place. So the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, the commanding officer who was then Evelyn Webb Carter, who went on to head the Army Benevolent Fund, and a guy who was from the SAS came back to command the battalion. That was fun, but that's another story. And he said, we're not shooting this anymore. It's a dangerous gun. And I've never seen so many helicopters and civil servants and generals in my life, because clearly, as I understand it now, the contracts said this will work. And God forbid anybody who says it doesn't work. So when the 1st Battalion of Grenadier Guards said this is a crock, it's not going to work. But there was bizarre things with Warrior. I remember the driver was the only one that could shut the back door of the vehicle. But,
design flaw.
Yeah, but he couldn't see at what state people were getting in and out of. And once the door started to close, it closed. So, when we got to barracks, they actually got a pig's leg, put it in this hydraulic door and hit the button. And they go, oh, yeah, there's no safety button, is there, at the back? No, there isn't, mate. And the driver doesn't know who's in, who's half out. And as you know, with infanteers, you're carrying all this kit and trying to get in and out of vehicles and Fred Carno's army. And then at the back on the door, there was the boiling vessel. Now, on the 432, the boiling vessel is a wonderful bit of kit, and it's ideally situated. But actually, the boiling vessel on the back of the Warrior was on the back door, and that's fine. But when you closed the door, you couldn't get your black mug underneath. And that was the biggest design fault. Never mind about doors closing and guns not working. If you couldn't get a brew, that's end day. So yeah, we were the first ones to get Warrior, and it was the first time really that there was more of an integrated army. We had a thing called AMI, which is the Armoured Infantry Manning Increment. And so suddenly we had guys coming from the Irish Guards, Scots Guards, Welsh Guards. And, you know, the first couple of months was pretty interesting in the mess. But actually it made the battalions far stronger, far better, getting different knowledge and working together.
Oh, wow. So then moving on to that, you said you did a 3-year tour. Did you?
Yeah, well,
did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, well, I kind of like, we went back to South Armagh. Oh, God, it's too many times. Went back to Besbrook. I guess it must have been 96, something like that. No, it wasn't. 93. I can't remember. Anyway, that was okay. But then the battalion was posted as a whole battalion for a 3-year tour in Ballykinler. Again, down in South Armagh, a beautiful place. Lovely runs along the beaches, the seals. You're down by the Moor Mountains. Stunning place. But there was a rumour going around that Marky Boy was going to be sent back to London and sit at some desk job in Whitehall, and over my dead body, that was not going to happen. So Marky Boy decided in his infinite wisdom that he would volunteer for a 3-year tour at Headquarters 3 Brigade, which was situated in Portadown in a porter cabin. I mean, this was not brigade headquarters, and so I had to come back and tell my wife that we were being posted, and that's excellent, dear, wonderful. Where are we going? South Armagh. Pardon? Now, the only time my wife had known about South Armagh is every time I packed the kit and headed off for 8 months, and we didn't have great times on emergency tours. So to pack up the family and say, well, we're going to South Armagh where all the snipers are and the terrorists are, and yep, that's it. You've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly where we're going. And so that's where we landed up. And I have to say, probably the best 3 years of my army career.
Oh, wow.
It was operational. There were very few brigades that were completely operational at the time, and 3 Brigade was down in South Armagh, and you were dealing with a lot of fascinating stuff from INT to Special Forces, and it was just a fascinating time. You had Drum Cree kicking off, which Scotty will know all about, and met some remarkable people from a lot of different cap badges, which I hadn't served with. So I've been in my battalion for about 18 years, never left the battalion, but met a whole different cap badges, professionalism, ways of working, learning, and it was absolutely fascinating, and I loved every minute of it. Tough times, always kind of on duty. You had your flak jacket literally in your porch of your house, and if the call came, you just ran out and put your jacket on. Daughter's birthdays, she was born in August, but she was, I've forgotten, must have been 10, 11 there. So all her birthdays in August were obviously in the garage, because it always rains in South Armagh. So even you think the height of summer, no, it was always going to be in the garage. But I met some wonderful people there and had a great time. And then Records Office, and Scotty alluded to it, earlier, phoned up and said, "Where would you like to go?" Well, that's always dangerous. I'd learned that lesson. Say nothing, and I go, "Look, I'm not playing that game. You tell me where you want me to go, and I'll decide whether I'm going or I'm not." And they said, "No, come on. Where would you like to go?" And I thought, right, okay. I was a warrant officer at the time. I said I wouldn't mind going back to the Supreme Headquarters in Belgium. By this time, of course, Bosnia, Kosovo was kicking up, and it was very much an operational headquarters, but at the next level up. So, I've been fortunate enough to go from my companies and platoons to a battalion level. I then worked at brigade level for 3 years operational. And said, right, let's go and see what the Supreme Headquarters do of this. So I went to the Supreme Headquarters. I was very fortunate enough to be sent to a little office called Special Operations, Spec Ops, where there was one SAS colonel, me, a ranger major, and a ranger colonel, and we ran special operations from the NATO side.
Oh, wow.
So whether it was the Dutch, the Germans and the British were typically the main players in special forces, and that was fascinating. Just a whole different level of professionalism. And kind of irrespective of rank, it was about experience. It was about knowledge, and the Americans aren't very good at that. They do love a bit of rank. So I used to keep slides in my desk drawer. I don't think I'm giving any secrets away, because where there'd be captain slides and major slides and colonel, and occasionally the boys, SACEUR would want briefing. Sorry, the Supreme Allied Commander or the deputy would want briefing. And of course, Hereford would send over Sergeant so-and-so or Corp, because they were the best people. They knew what you can't send a sergeant in. So you would put slides on to go, right, you're now Colonel so-and-so. And they go, "Hi, Colonel, good to see you. Thanks, sir." And they go, "Yeah, whatever, mate." So extraordinary times. I was very fortunate to serve with three extraordinary colonels. All of them had that Hereford ethos, utterly calm, utterly professional, thoroughly amusing, never flapped. And if they got grisly, then whoever they got grizzly with needed to stand by. But I had the most wonderful time with them. And then, for some inexplicable reason, promotion came around and they decided that I should be a W01. And they sent me down the road to become the families officer and staff assistant of the support unit at the Supreme Headquarters. So I'd gone from special operations to looking after families and staff assistant to the UK contingent out in Belgium.
What a change that is! That is a completely different.
Families officer was far harder than Free Brigade, far harder than Cross McGlen. I think the army is, the armed forces are a whole lot better now. But I used to get very angry about how our families were treated. I've had wives coming in and putting their 18-month-old baby in my in tray and saying, "You look after it." I'd say they were extraordinary times. I kind of loved every minute, because I could go around irritating people with the authority of the families officer, and saying, this needs to be done. Regularly going into the commanding officer, "You need to sort this." And I had great fun because everybody was scared of the families. and I had the family's backing, so therefore I was all powerful. But it was great times, and again, that learning experience that you would just never get, I guess, in Civilian Street. But we did a lot of good work in the family's office. New ideas were coming in. Then you still had Safa sisters, and the whole community. I always remember, and it's something. I went to a Safa meeting, and the Safa meetings were always chaired by the senior military person's wife, and it was all full of colonels' wives and jolly good and absolutely wonderful. So I turned up. All right, I'm going to one of these, and you can't stop me. So I went to this admiral's house in the middle of the night. Yeah, I mean, mansion, and about 15 ladies there, and I've never forgotten it. And it was said by the chair, right, now this is what we'll do, and the unit will do this, and the commanding officer will do that. And I sort of coughed, and she went, yes, Mark, is the problem. So I looked down at my badge of rank and my uniform, and I said, I think you'll find I'm the only one here wearing a uniform. And this committee certainly does not tell the commanding officer what he's doing. That went down like a treat. But funnily enough, that single incident led to a job when I got out. And but that's kind of the end of the military bit, I guess.
So what made you want to leave then? It sounds like you were having a good time. It sounds like the past 6 years sounded like they were great for you.
I think if I'm honest, the army was changing. I think all soldiers, sailors and airmen probably go through the angry, frustrated, annoyed with the system. I kind of got through that. I just had enough. And bizarrely, this is where it comes. I got a call in my office. I was sat there from a guy who was a colonel in the Grenadier Guards, and Mr. Elliot, it's former colonel. You won't know me, and I thought I do know you. You were the chief of staff in London District, and I mean, just so wonderfully, typically Guards officer. And I can say that because there's a bit to add. So anyway, he said, we know about you. We're starting a company to build an insurance company to help members of the armed forces. And we've heard about you, and we'd like to offer you a job. Yeah, fine. He said, well, have a think about it. I'll give you a call back. So I put the phone down and went, not a chance. You just don't get phoned up and offered this. So never thought anything of it. Anyway, 3 weeks later, he phoned back and he said, right, I'm offering you this job. And I go, right, okay. Let's throw as many spanners in the work as I can here. Let's test the system. And so I said, well, that's fine. You'll need to fly me back to the UK. And, I said, if I'm getting out, I need to bring my wife so she knows what's going on. Absolutely no problem. I went, blimey. I've never forgotten it. So we flew back and we had this meeting in the Horse Guards Hotel, just down the road from the Ministry of Defence. And very nice. And I asked all the awkward questions that I could because, frankly, it wasn't going to happen. Anyway, he said, right, that's the end. Great to meet you, Mark and Claire, and blah-de-blah. How much do we owe you? And I said, well, the flights were this. And I said, I'm really sorry. I've had to get a taxi because I couldn't get, and blah, blah, blah. He said, well, that's absolutely no problem. Anyway, he reached down, got his checkbook out, you see, and made out a check to what I said. And so, fine, thank you very much. I played the game. And when we were outside, my wife turned around and said, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, what are you going to do now? I said, I'm getting out. And she said, pardon? I said, I'm getting out. That's the first time ever in my life I've told somebody and they just got the checkbook and wrote. if they can do that, I'm getting out. So went back. I've very kindly been offered or recommended and offered a commission, and kind of said no, it's not for me. I got hauled up to Germany, to the GOC in Germany, going, Mark, what are you doing? And I go, I've had it, Jen. And he went, but you'll be commissioned, and this is great. And I went, I know I should do, to be commissioned from guardsman and then be commissioned should be every soldier, sailor, and airman's ultimate ambition. And, very few get to do it. But I got to the stage where I wasn't angry, frustrated, annoyed, or I just didn't understand what they were talking about anymore. It was just gobbledygook. And so I thought, right, let's part as friends. And so we were out in Germany, out in Belgium, got posted back to Andover, which was then DLO, I think, Defence Logistics, to which walked in, the commanding officer there said, oh, Mr. Elliott, so last 6 months in the UK, this is what I said, look, let's be honest. I don't want you, and you really don't want me. I'm just going to get in your way and be annoying, and you don't want that. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just disappear, and that'll be fine. Well, what about resettlement? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Well, you've got to go and see this retired officer, and he signed your form. All right, okay. So I walked into this office, and this retired officer, never forgotten, had dirty shoes, so that annoyed me. And he did, right, the grass, all the usual spiel, the grass isn't always greener on the other side, Mr. I go, well, what have you done? And he went, pardon? I said, well, what do you know of starting a business and running a business? Well, I don't. I said, well, you sign there, and that's it. And that's exactly what I did. I walked out the door. I handed in my ID card. I didn't do resettlement. And I started my new job building an insurance company to help members of the armed forces.
Oh, wow. That's brilliant.
Well, other than sort of having arrived back and sort of left these shores, or I suppose, as you guys all know, you're kind of lifted. In my case, I was lifted from the real world into this military world at 16. And then at 41, I went back to it. And you go, right, so how do you buy a house? Well, you just walk in and go, I'll have that one. Pardon? Well, that's how you do it. I've no idea. So I'd never voted because I kind of didn't have credit. I passed my driving test in 85, but then driven mostly abroad. I'd lived in Northern Ireland and then Belgium. So I hadn't been resident in the UK for about 6-7 years. People go, where you been? I've been in the military. And you just knew nothing. I suppose it could be thrown back. Well, perhaps, Mark, if you'd done a proper resettlement, you might have found out all about this, but I didn't. And so it was an extraordinary time. It was fascinating to really start off and build a company, which is what we did.
Even with the massive culture shock of going onto a civvy street.
Yeah, I mean, I think, funnily enough, startups and building companies is what I guess I've been doing it for the past, since I left, so 20-something years now. So from an insurance company, built it to then I built a countryside organisation, basically because I wanted to go out in the countryside and I thought the rest were idiots. And then started building a military charity pretty much for the same reasons. You find out that building a company, there's so many similarities between getting your section or your platoon or your company to do something that they really don't want to do. or are struggling with, whether it's the leadership skills, the communication skills, all that, unbeknownst to you, you've got, but no one knows it. I always say that the problem for the boys and girls is they don't know what they know. And it doesn't translate until you suddenly say, and I remember saying, years ago in the Tin Hut to some of the boys, say, right, if I go out, if I say to you, right, go and clear that car park out of there, what will you do? They said, well, we'll go and clear the car park. I go, all right, off you go. So, and as they're walking out the door, you go, what are you going to do? Well, how do you know what to do? And they go, well, we just know it. Now, what they mean, they would have gone to the owners and they would have spoken to them and they found a way, but they know stuff. And that's certainly what you find when you're building a new company, and you can do things different. You have a freedom to get things right, or right as you see it, shall we say. And everything that you've learned, that you remember from the idiots you've met to the stuff that you read that makes absolutely no sense, you always have in your head that I'm never going to do that. Clearly, you probably do. But it's a wonderful freedom to start companies with a vision and a passion, and use the skills that perhaps you didn't know you had, but most servicemen and women do. Yeah.
So what made you then start with Help for Heroes? Well, how did that kind of...
Well, bizarrely, I had eventually headed up this insurance company of which I know nothing about insurance, but you don't need to know anything about insurance. That's what you get experts in for. And I'd started a countryside organisation called NOBS, which was the national organisation for beaters and pickers up, you see, because I wanted to go out with my dogs. And I found it really hard to go and do. So I created the organisation. And it was through that I came to find out more about the genius that is Bryn Parry. I'm talking about his drawings, by the way, at the moment, just in case he's listening, or he might do. And so I got to know Bryn through the countryside, and he did some drawings for me for my organisation. And I've been to a gun dog show in Oxford, and I'd seen a demonstration by a charity called Canine Partners, and they train dogs for the disabled. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Labradors learning to switch off lights, switch on lights. They can take washing out of the machine. And I thought, my dogs can barely pick up a pheasant, and then I'm chasing after them. So for some reason, I went up to this guy and I said, look, you don't know me, but I think what you do is incredible. I'll run a marathon for you and try and raise you 500 quid. And at the time, I was running a fair bit. And he went, yeah, great, super, thanks very much. And I got back and I thought, right, how do you raise 500 quid? So you bang out an email to friends and people and I got a response from Emma Parry, Bryn's wife. And she said, I'll give you 20 quid if you help us start an organisation to help wounded, sick and injured servicemen. And with your background, we need you aboard. To which I went, can't be that hard, can it? Groups get together, raise 10,000 quid, tick. And that's, as they say,
how it started.
Having said yes, I think it took about probably under 12 hours before Bryn was sending me op plans, everything, names and what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And it literally just went from, I think we always said our first email together was 16th of July 2007. Mm-hmm. And then we actually launched Help for Heroes 1st of October 2007. But that summer of 07 was just phonetic. I mean, it just Everything went. I mean, there was Richard Dannett, who was then professional head of the British Army, getting involved. There were generals, there were laws, there were name changes. But it was another wonderful opportunity to have that experience and knowledge and start something new and exciting that had never been done before in a different way, and to challenge the current or the then current thinking, because it simply at the time wasn't good enough, having spent quite a bit of time up at Celio where the boys were being flown. So that's what we did.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I've asked a lot of questions, as I always do during these things. I will go and open the floor up to, I know Scotty's got some questions. Then I'll go over to Rupert. Scotty, the floor.
Yes, sir.
It's slightly worrying seeing Scotty with his phone out.
Yeah, that's always worrying right there.
All right, Mark, these are probably some of the most important questions you've ever been asked. I know that you're were a guardsman, so I'll start with the easiest one first. So, Alex, a minute, please, young man. If you can let me know. If we can. Brilliant. Action. Okay, name.
Mark Elliot.
Well done. There's a bit of a pause there. Excellent, good answer. Yeah. How long can you hold your breath for?
As long as the sergeant tells me to.
Excellent, good. Do you believe in fate?
I didn't, but I do now. But only when it's good.
Good. If you had all the power in the world, what would you implement?
Lockdown around my house.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals? Now, you were in Germany.
No, never.
Absolutely. What does a person need to be happy?
Themselves.
Good answer. What's the best age?
The one I'm at the moment.
These are fast. Is double dipping at a party ever acceptable?
Always.
Oh, is it? Oh, there you are. Would you like to live forever?
Depends what I'm doing.
All right. That is brilliant. I'm sure now the listeners have a better idea of who the living legend Mark Elliot is.
Hey.
And,
decided he's not a living legend.
And the thing is, too, I can just only say, yeah, on behalf of Joanna and I, thanks very much for all the work that you've done.
Oh, yes. Fantastic. Rupert, you're up next with the questions.
Yeah, well, we've had the privilege of doing some work with Band of Brothers and Band of Sisters, really helping the family side of that. And what I was interested in, having served in Ballykinler and places like that, where your small kids are there with the mirror on a stick, searching the underside of the car to make sure there's not a bomb on it, which was sort of second nature. And my wife, when she wasn't with child, as it were, being able to do press-ups to have a look in the sort of local car park just to make sure there wasn't anything put on whilst we were getting our messages and stuff. So actually putting your family into Armagh for 3 years, that must have been quite challenging. So it was really about the family's aspect. How did they adapt to?
It was. I mean, you're right. It wasn't an easy conversation to start with, but actually, in Mackham Barracks in Portadown, I've forgotten how many quarters there were, but let's say there were 70 quarters there, Rupert. All from all ranks. From the brigade commander, you're behind a 40-foot wire fence, guarded. Completely. The houses were fairly new, some of the best quarters we've actually been in, so that was pleasant. And I guess rather like battalions do when they're operational, the family side of it came together. They, all the kids were in the same boat. Some kids went to boarding school if they were too old. The schools in Portadown were fine for the youngsters, but once they got to sort of 13, 14, most of them went to boarding school. So actually, you were kind of locked in, and the families dealt with it extremely well. The thing, I suppose, that was different from an emergency tour or up banner to a 3-year tour was at the weekend, Rupert. You would drive out and drive to the Mourne Mountains or down to the lakes or Glen Arif. And just explore a wonderful country. But you knew where to go and where not to go. And that was the case. So the families did very well. They came together far more, because I guess in the UK, normal they all go home at weekends and they're all spread. Whereas there, you ain't going nowhere unless it was to Lisbon to the M&S.
Yeah. I've been there a few times. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing was transition, really, because I think we deal with a lot of families who struggle with transition, and I know from my experience, what I hadn't appreciated, because I got too focused on getting my new job and it was all about me. And I think a lot of soldiers do that, but actually the family were quite surprised, because suddenly their identity had changed as well, and they were no longer part of that family group that had formed, in Ireland or with the regiment, and all those people had gone, and suddenly they were somewhere else, surrounded by people who didn't get why they were still looking under the car out of habit.
I think that's absolutely fair, and I think, like anything, some transition better than others. I think we were fairly fortunate. My wife, I'm sure, would disagree, because having got back to the UK, one of the things we did was set up a call centre in Colchester, and so I was gone most of the week. So having brought the scouts, right, bye. So my world hadn't changed too much. But I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot struggle with it, particularly if you've been in a long time. I think probably, I don't know, it's better now. Battalions seem to be more stable, doing sort of 6-8 year tours in a location, whereas you and I were doing 18 months, 3 years, and so you moved around the world pretty quickly. And I'm not saying it was rather like the Battle of Waterloo, but the whole battalion, their wives and their kids, were picked up, moved, dumped, picked up, moved, dumped, and that was kind of it. There weren't the communications of emails, mobile phones. That didn't happen. The battalion's families and its soldiers were it, and it moved as an entity. Nowadays, hopefully it's a great deal better, and there's more stability for families, particularly wives or the member of the family that's not in, to have a job and a career with some sort of stability. The Navy kind of always had it, the RAF to a degree, but certainly as an infantry battalion, forget it.
Yeah. Well, when you were the families officer, what was the biggest surprise for you when you started doing that role?
I think the biggest surprise I had, Alex, was that the Navy and the Air Force don't do as they're told. I mean, extraordinary. I mean, I assumed as a warrant officer class 1 that when I said something, that was it. And to have a corporal in the RAF go, well, I'm not sure I want to do that.
Yeah.
It was the first moment that I sort of braced myself back to 6'4" and stuck my chest out, and I went, pardon? I might be there. What?
Switching.
So it was all of that. It was then realising that, because as Scotty alluded to, and Rupert, if I barked an order, I was fairly used to people shifting. And then suddenly, when you're dealing with other services and families, apparently they don't. And they don't. they don't often take kindly to it. So you learn to adapt pretty damn quickly. It wasn't hard, but it was certainly a shock. I naturally assumed you told people what to do and they went and did it. I mean, hard.
I think from listening to Scotty talk, I don't believe that for a second. I think when someone went and gave Scotty an order, I don't reckon Scotty did it straight away.
Well, yeah, but there were ways. If Scotty didn't do it, there were ways and means of making sure that he did do it.
But I said, Alex, back when I first joined up, definitely we had a regimental sergeant major, W01, and he was about the same height and stature as Mark, and you used to hear the ammo boots coming up towards vehicle parts. Well, if I could have put a brush up my bum, I had a brush, a paintbrush, or something else. I was trying to, please don't look at me, don't look at me, don't look at me. This was the scariest man you would ever meet. And I remember when he got commissioned, he went into the family's office, and he was a family's officer. And he was I think it was about 3 weeks, and then he was removed from post because he was making the wives march into his office, which I thought was highly amusing.
Thankfully, I never made that mistake. I was probably more terrified of the wives and the families.
I must admit, I always did as I was told, to a degree. And then when I got a couple of ranks on my arm, then you can kind of bend them and stretch them a little bit.
That's the Scotty I know. That's the Scotty I know. Yeah, there we go. That's more like
I think we all did, to be honest.
I think that's right. I think I can. The only advantage I could think of being promoted to W01 is that when this scrotty little PTI in their flash kit came, right, sir, you've got to do this. I remember turning around, which was probably pretty naughty of me, going, don't think you find I have to. And he looked at me and said, nah. It was all well worth it then.
Oh, yeah. Well, it says that you had a lot of fun as well as that. So I'm going to ask you to pinpoint. It's a hard question. What is your favourite moment, Mark, in your military career from all that 25 years? I want a specific moment. You can't go and go, oh, well, these past 3 years were amazing.
It was being at home in Belgium. I mean, for bizarre moments. Am I allowed bizarre moments?
Of course.
And the operations officer from Spec Ops office was on duty, and he phoned me up and said, Mr. Elliott, you need to come in. One of our planes has gone down. And he went, which one? And he said, well, one of the stealth bombers. I went, well, they've hit your stealth bomber. And he went, yeah, we've got to go, and it's called search and rescue. So anyway, I said, well, you better send a car. He said, so what shall I do? I said, well, first thing to do is put the kettle on. Then we'll work it out. So anyway, I sent a car, went in. Right, where is he? We had a signal that the pilot was okay. This was in the middle of Bosnia, Kosovo. And he said, well, the 2-star wants briefing, and, don't worry, leave it with me. I'll go and do it. Wandered in, briefed this 2-star. And the wonderful thing about Spec Ops is you don't have to say anything. Because you go, oh, I'm really sorry, sir, leave it with us. We'll get it sorted. And he can't ask anything, which was just as well, because we had absolutely no idea what we're doing. So a phone call went back to Hereford and through the chains, and the boys went and got the pilot. And by the next morning, it was all sorted. But I think as bizarre moments, this poor major ops officer panicking because the Yanks had a stealth bomber hit, and then going. I think
that was an F-117, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, it was just one of those moments to go, pardon. Like, how are we going to get out of this? And I've been in some scrapes in the NAFI in my time, but you're thinking, right, you've got to think on your feet here.
You should have went. Stealth isn't the word stealth for a reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, needless to say, the story is slightly longer with the giggles that we had in the office again. Not believe what they've done.
I was going to go and say, how do you hit a stealth bomber?
Well, I mean,
By
Yeah.
I'm assuming by luck. I'm assuming they were aiming for something else.
Or it wasn't that stealth.
They're very proud of it. You can still.
Yeah.
I was there a couple of years ago, and you can still buy postcards. Of the damned plane with.
I mean,
To be honest, though,
because it all ended well. It was a funny story.
the actual missile systems was fantastic that they had in the countryside buried in, and there was something to do with radar stations or something didn't go on in time, which means that they could get a fix onto this aircraft.
Absolutely.
And that's how it went off. And then, they were.
But needless to say,
Mark said, lucky to get the pilot back.
Yeah, it all ended well.
Aye, and that's the stories we like. That's a good moment right there. That's going to be hard to top right there. I don't know what I think.
It's called thinking on your feet, going, give me a moment. Yeah, I'll get it sorted. But actually, those moments happen all the time. Whether you're in business, the first IA I always say is always put the kettle on. We had some terrible times, with Help for Heroes. Where you just had to go, whoa, right, okay, let's just stop everything, put the kettle on, and work out what we're going to do. So there's moments. So first thing to do, don't panic, put the kettle on, have a cup of tea.
That's really good advice. I think that's advice that all our listeners can take there. I mean, I'm going to take that advice as well. And my final question for you is, what does family mean to you?
Oh, everything. Again, I was very fortunate that when my daughter was born, then I went away, and when I came back, she was walking. Then I went away. Then she went to school. So my wife and my daughter would say I've had very little experience. But no, they are. My family. I couldn't have done anything without my family. I've had the freedom to help build businesses, to serve, I was going to say all over the world, but it wasn't, to serve many years in South Armagh.
Just over the water.
Yeah, just over the water. No, everything. Well, my wife has to sacrifice a career. We were very fortunate enough. I always used to say the only two things that ever worked in the British Army was one was boarding school allowance, and the other was the compay system. And so my daughter benefited from the boarding school when I was we were in Northern Ireland, and then in Belgium, which allowed my daughter to have a good education, and then did very well, and has been was in the Met for 10 years, and now is Wiltshire and a detective sergeant. So it kind of worked.
Oh, wow.
But everything, because they allow you to go and do all this fun stuff, whilst being able to come home and through the front door, even though whenever you came home from tours, the kettle had always changed and the bread bin wasn't where the bread bin was, and that's really annoying. And the furniture had moved, and you go, what's that? And you last about 2 days, don't you, before they say, when are you going back? But no, everything.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. Well, this has been a brilliant podcast, Mike. I mean, this is a great way to start 2021.
You had to think there, didn't you?
I did.
What year are we in?
I paused and I went 2021. Well, guys, thank you very much for today. It's been absolutely fantastic. To everyone going and listening, if you can like, share and subscribe to this, make sure to follow Give Us Time on all your social media pages. And thank you so much, Mark. This has been really interesting and a great podcast. So thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening. So thank you and goodbye.